Manchester City have won just one of their last 11 matches, which means that it is open season for calling Pep Guardiola a bald fraud again.
Yes! Come on! Come on! Yes! Get in!
Honestly, he's only won one Champions League in the last 13 years, despite managing Barcelona, Bayern Munich, and Manchester City during that time. Zinedine Zidane won 3 in only 2.5 seasons at Real Madrid, and he is just as follically challenged. In all seriousness, it is remarkable how quickly things can change in football. A couple of months ago, Manchester City were still title favourites, they could seemingly do no wrong, and Pep Guardiola was universally regarded as the greatest manager of his generation, if not of all time. Go on what is, admittedly, a staggeringly poor run of form though, and all of a sudden you've got fans chanting that you're getting sacked in the morning, pundits and YouTubers, for crying out loud, questioning your tactical acumen, and you've accidentally dug your own nails so deep into your head on the touchline that you have actually drawn blood. It's a funny old game, isn't it, football? One of the most common criticisms of Pep Guardiola, intensified during Man City's current poor run of form, is that he ruins talented players. You hear this all the time, but I must admit, when you actually sit down and try to think of players that Pep Guardiola could reasonably be described as having ruined, it is slim pickings. In actual fact, for a manager who has coached at the highest level with unrivaled consistency for more than 15 years, it is really rather impressive, and it would appear to indicate that the opposite may be true. In terms of players Guardiola has helped to make great or to develop, Sergio Busquets is maybe the first one that comes to mind. Meanwhile, the likes of Gerard Piqué, Andres Iniesta and Lionel Messi all came on leaps and bounds under him at Barcelona, Joshua Kimmich, David Alaba and Thiago Alcantara at Bayern, and Raheem Sterling, John Stones and Phil Foden at Man City. As for the players Pep is supposed to have ruined, players that I see commonly cited include the likes of Mario Götze, Alexander Hleb, and Benjamin Mendy. Götze was undoubtedly a disappointment at Bayern, and he has been critical of Pep Guardiola, but I think that his myopathy and chronic injury problems probably had a lot more to do with his downfall than Guardiola specifically. Hleb was just stuck behind maybe the most talented attacking midfield and wide options ever assembled, and I don't think that Guardiola can be held wholly responsible for him failing to set the world alight on loan at Stuttgart, Birmingham City and Wolfsburg. And in Mendy's case, it is quite difficult to mitigate for a new signing suffering successive ACL injuries and then being arrested and charged with multiple counts of rape. I even saw someone claim, while researching this video, that Pep ruined Martin Di Michaelis. Aside from the fact that he was 36 years old and looked as though he was running through treacle with legs that were being weighed down by concrete breeze blocks when Pep arrived, and only went on to make 12 more appearances before he retired from football, Di Michaelis was also out of contract in the same summer that Guardiola arrived at Man City, so, I'm not having that one. The fact that I found it quite difficult to think of players who could legitimately be described as having been ruined by Pep Guardiola only strengthened my resolve to make this video though. You know what they say, God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. Without further ado then, who never played under Pep Guardiola, and therefore wasn't even considered, I'm not sure why you brought him up to be perfectly honest, here is my best attempt at finding 7 players who were ruined by Pep Guardiola. And no, not like that, you dirty dog. That would be a very different type of video, and I have absolutely no evidence to suggest that any players have been. 7th, Matheus Nunes. This video was tough to assemble, and while I suspect most people will agree with this inclusion, I have 1 or 2 issues with it. Which is ironic, really, given that I am literally the one responsible for it. There's no doubt that Matheus Nunes has so far been a pretty poor signing by Pep Guardiola and Man City, signed for a hefty £53 million from Wolverhampton Wanderers in the summer of 2023. Last season, while Man City won a 4th successive Premier League title, Nunes barely featured, playing just 654 minutes of Premier League football, which is equivalent to about 7 games, and only 1,360 minutes in all competitions, despite Man City competing in a whopping 7 different competitions. That's an average of barely 2 full 90-minute appearances per competition. Nunes has been a bit more involved so far this season, already having played over 500 minutes in the Premier League and over 1,000 in all competitions. But then again, his increased minutes have coincided with Man City's form turning to detritus. The reason that I am tentative about including Nunes in this 7 is because, whilst I don't think there can be any doubt that he has been a bad signing, as things stand, for 53 million quid, I'm not entirely sure whether Pep Guardiola can be described as having ruined him, or whether the step up from Wolves to Man City is just a significant one. He took a season, like a lot of players do under Guardiola, to settle in, and while far from dazzling, he hasn't actually been that bad this season, other than, against Man United, in a very underwhelming Man City team. Ultimately, almost 3 years ago, Guardiola called Nunes one of the best players in the world at Sporting, and by his own logic, if what we are seeing now is supposed to be one of the best players in the world, Guardiola must be doing something wrong. Ruined might be a stretch, but Nunes is a talented player who has underwhelmed at the Etihad, and with far from a plethora of outstanding candidates, that is just about enough for him to sneak in ahead of Barcelona flop Carson. 6th, Zlatan Ibrahimović. Probably the first player that comes to most people's mind when they think of falling out with Guardiola, failing to live up to expectations under him, and a missed opportunity for Pep. I've included Zlatan Ibrahimović in 6th place, but I must admit, I don't fully agree with that narrative. I promise you, I will have much more conviction about the other 5 inclusions. Again, there's no doubt that Ibrahimović was a very bad signing by Guardiola and Barcelona, a much worse one than Matheus Nunes was for Man City in fact, given that the £40 million plus Samuel Eto'o that Barca paid for him in 2009 could be considered, depending upon how you valued Eto'o, to be effectively a world record fee at the time. Eto'o had scored 36 goals in all competitions in Guardiola's debut campaign at Barca, leading Barcelona's scoring charts in La Liga, as the club won a famous treble. Ibrahimović, meanwhile, had scored 29 goals in his last season at Inter Milan, leading the Serie A scoring charts, as Inter won the Scudetto. Eto'o and Ibrahimović enjoyed very contrasting debut campaigns at their new clubs, however, and the verb enjoyed only really works in one of those 2 instances. While Eto'o won a truly historic and improbable treble at Inter, which included knocking Guardiola's Barcelona out of the Champions League, Ibrahimović started well, but his game time reduced as the campaign went on. That was partly due to a couple of niggling injuries, but primarily, it was a result of Lionel Messi's desire to play centrally as a false 9, a sentiment which was shared by Pep Guardiola, leading to a pretty catastrophic falling out between Pep and Zlatan. The relationship between them reached breaking point following Barcelona's Champions League exit against Ibrahimovic's former club, and at the end of the season, Ibrahimović joined AC Milan on loan, followed by a permanent move worth just €24 million. It is true that Pep didn't get the best out of Ibrahimović, that he was a poor signing for Barcelona, and that he played better football and a more starring role everywhere else that he played. So to that extent, one could conclude that Pep ruined Ibrahimović during his brief time at the Camp Nou. The counter-argument to that would be that Ibrahimović was actually pretty good when he played under Pep, if not as talismanic as he was everywhere else, scoring 21 goals in 45 games, and the only reason why he wasn't the star man, and didn't always start games in his preferred position, is because he was competing with the best player in the world, and quite possibly the greatest player of all time, who scored 47 goals in 53 games that season, 53 in 55 the following season, and a truly ridiculous 73 in 60 during Pep's final season in charge. It is true, nonetheless, that Guardiola has often struggled with big characters who challenge him, not entirely dissimilar to Sir Alex Ferguson, it should be said, and that not only was Pep unable to make things work with Ibrahimović and Messi together, one suspects that he didn't want to, so Zlatan just about merits a spot in 6th. 5th, Gabriel Jesus. Whereas most people would agree with Matheus Nunes and Zlatan Ibrahimović having been ruined by Pep, but I have some reservations about them both, most people will probably disagree with my assessment of Gabriel Jesus, yet I am pretty firm on this one. I'm beginning to think that I'm just a contrarian. Before you dismiss it out of hand, though, allow me to make my case. Or don't, there's really nothing that I can do to stop you, but if you do click off to watch cat videos or Mr. Beast putting people through increasingly degrading endurance tests in order to pay off their own family's healthcare bills, you will never know why I think that Pep Guardiola ruined Gabriel Jesus. Still there? Wise decision, comrade. The prevailing perception of Gabriel Jesus in England is that he joined Manchester City when he was very young, which is obviously true, developed well under Guardiola, spent 6.5 incredibly successful seasons at the club, and just couldn't quite nail down the number 9 shirt, playing second fiddle behind Sergio Aguero when he arrived, and sold in order to make way for Erling Haaland when he departed, and there's certainly no shame in that. You could even be forgiven for thinking that Guardiola got the best out of Jesus based upon the fact that he appears to have regressed at Arsenal, having scored just 4 Premier League goals last season and none so far this season, albeit he did just bag a hat-trick against Crystal Palace in the League Cup. I honestly think that Gabriel Jesus was a special, and if not quite unique, then certainly a very rare talent at Palmeiras though, who, with the right development, and in the right system, could have become genuinely world-class. Incredibly gifted and inventive, Jesus had that street football style about him, combined with a Brazilian flair, an incredible sense of self-belief, and the ability to find the back of the net. He wasn't quite as explosive, but there was a touch of Wayne Rooney about a teenage Jesus in Brazil, and he carried that immense talent and confidence into his starting life in the Premier League, scoring 7 goals in only 10 appearances in his first half season. Guardiola's hyper-choreographed and positionally disciplined football appeared, to me at least, although Jesus himself has echoed this sentiment, to restrict the Brazilian's freedom, expression, and ultimately his confidence. Jesus was most prolific in his first 4 months at the Etihad as a teenager, and he was probably at his worst in his last 2 seasons at the club, aged 23 and 24, when he should, theoretically, have been coming into his prime. I'm not saying that is entirely Guardiola's fault. The reason every player in this 7 declines somewhat under Pep is likely to be multifaceted, but I don't think that he helped matters, and now aged 27, while I hope that I'm wrong, I'm not entirely sure that we will ever see him reach the heights that he was once capable of. You may recall Jesus actually had a brilliant pre-season and start to the season after signing for Arsenal, where he was given a lot of freedom, and it seemed like we might see the best of him again. But then he picked up a really nasty knee injury, and now Arteta plays football that is perhaps even more disciplined than Pep's. Jesus has said that when, without any other available forwards, Pep chose to start Alexander Zinchenko as a false 9 ahead of him, he knew that his days were numbered and he had to leave, and do you know what? Yeah, fair enough. 4th, Thierry Henry. Unlike several players in this 7, Thierry Henry has never had a bad word to say about Pep Guardiola. Quite the opposite, in fact. Whereas Lionel Messi's untouchable status at Barcelona was problematic for Zlatan Ibrahimovic's first-team prospects and his ego, Thierry Henry embraced it, and he has only ever had positive things to say about the pair of them. In 3 seasons in Catalonia, and 2 seasons under Pep, Henry won 7 trophies, and he has credited Guardiola for opening his eyes to the world of football, calling him, quote, the best coach I have ever seen. I have little doubt, therefore, that Thierry Henry himself would disagree with my assessment and his own inclusion in this 7, but tough shit, Thierry. I'm putting you in anyway. It's my list, not yours. While anyone, whether it be Zlatan, Thierry Henry or Samuel Eto'o, would have been, and indeed was outshone by Lionel Messi in his prime, and I don't think that is a negative reflection on either them or Guardiola, Henry went from being the talisman at Arsenal, the standout player in the Premier League, and one of the best players on the planet, to, and again, this is his own words, being used as a decoy at Barcelona. Henry talked about Guardiola's 3 Ps at Barcelona, play, possession, and position, emphasising that position was the most important of the 3. Henry was no stranger to playing out wide on the left by 2008, when Pep got the Barca job, but he was used to coming in off the touchline and drifting between central areas and that left channel at Arsenal, making it difficult for teams to pick him up and allowing him to get on the ball as often as possible. It was completely different under Guardiola. Henry was made to hug the touchline constantly, and while that was great for Barcelona's shape, and Henry, admirably, was happy to do that job to benefit the team, it certainly ruined Henry in the sense that he lost the magic, the invention, and the sheer aura that surrounded him at Arsenal. Henry was a great player in a great team, but the magic was lost, and that is worthy of an inclusion. Third, Jack Grealish. Talking of the magic being lost, in third place is maybe the player that you see most often cited as having been ruined by Pep Guardiola, and that is none other than Jack Grealish. Not unlike Henry, in the sense that Grealish went from being a maverick who played with a lot of freedom at his former club, to a very functional role with much less freedom under Pep. Also like Henry, Grealish did that job brilliantly in the 2022-23 season, Man City's greatest of all time, in which they won the treble and the Champions League for the very first time. You could argue that justifies Grealish's £100 million transfer fee, which broke the British transfer record, a bit like some people argue that Fernando Torres' goal against Barcelona justified his £50 million British record fee for Chelsea. You would be wrong, but you could make the argument. But the reality is that even if Grealish had played brilliantly at Manchester City throughout the entirety of his 3.5 years there, when, in actual fact, he's only been very good in one of them, even in that one, as with Henry, but to an even greater extent, the magic was gone. Where Grealish used to be a player who'd make you sit up and smile every time that he got on the ball, looking to take players on, beat them and make things happen, now, when he plays, he tends to stay wide, he holds his position and the shape of the team, and often, unlike when he arrived, his first thought will be to check back, pass backwards, and recycle possession. As I said in the intro, I am actually pretty skeptical about the claim that Pep Guardiola ruins players. His track record is fairly phenomenal, at least compared to just about any other manager. But Grealish is someone who I feel has regressed fairly significantly under the Catalan, and who has certainly become a lot less fun to watch. Second, Calvin Phillips. Whereas Jack Grealish has become a lot less exciting under Pep Guardiola, Calvin Phillips just fell off the face of the earth. It's easy to forget now, but when Man City signed Phillips for £45 million, he was starting alongside Declan Rice in midfield for England. He had enjoyed 2 excellent seasons in the Premier League at Leeds United, and he even won the England Men's Player of the Year award for the 2020-21 season, an award which was previously won by the likes of Harry Kane, Wayne Rooney, and Steven Gerrard. I could even remember a clip of Mika Richards and Jamie Redknapp debating who was a better passer of the ball between Calvin Phillips and Rodri.
I'll tell you what he is. He's a better passer than both of them. By far, the way he pings the ball about. Phillips.
Better passer than Rodri?
Are you taking the piss?
Are you thinking
Are you taking the piss? Listen, I'll back you up. Are you not thinking...
Are you taking the piss?
Well, you think that Rodri is a better passer of the ball than Phillips? I'm going. You think he's a better passer? You think he's a better passer than Rodri?
You think Phillips
is a better passer than Rodri? 100%. All day long. You think that Rodri's just a nice, simple, cutting type? Are you?
In his first season at the Etihad, Phillips played a grand total of 291 minutes of Premier League football, and he didn't start his first league game for the club until after Man City had already won the Premier League title. Phillips was part of the England squad that reached the quarterfinals of the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, despite the fact that he wasn't playing for Man City at the time. But Pep Guardiola, when asked why he wasn't in his squad after returning home from the tournament, told reporters that Phillips was overweight. Guardiola later apologised for those remarks, saying that he was, quote, sorry, and apologises to him.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, don't hurt me, sorry.
But also that, quote, one mistake in 8 years is not bad, end quote. Phillips has talked about how that incident not only knocked his confidence, as you'd imagine his entire spell at Man City has, it also made it hard for him to earn a move elsewhere because clubs were concerned about his fitness, diet, and professionalism. For the first half of his second season at Man City, Phillips played fewer than 90 minutes of Premier League football. Not in one match, in total. In the January transfer window, he joined West Ham, where he did play, but both he and Hammers fans probably wish that he hadn't. Currently on loan at Ipswich Town, one hopes that Phillips can get back somewhere close to his best, but there can be few more obvious or correct inclusions in this video. First, Joe Hart. Jack Grealish's downfall might have hurt more, given how fun he was to watch at Villa, and Calvin Phillips is maybe fresher in our collective consciences, having happened recently, but no player has been more thoroughly ruined by Pep Guardiola than Joe Hart. Honestly, he absolutely ran a train on the bloke. Hart was England and Man City's undisputed number one when Pep Guardiola got the Man City job, widely regarded as one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League, and having just turned 29, he had already won the Premier League Golden Glove, a joint record 4 times, putting him level with Petr Cech. Theoretically, only just coming into his prime as a goalkeeper at that age, most people expected Joe Hart to become one of England and Man City's all-time leading appearance holders. Pep took one look at him meanwhile in training and said, "Nah, not for me thanks mate," and signed Claudio Bravo, who is 4 years older than Hart instead. The prevailing wisdom at the time was that Hart wasn't good enough for Pep Guardiola with the ball at his feet, whereas Bravo, who had played 75 games in the last 2 seasons at Barcelona, was renowned for his footwork and distribution. Sadly, in his first season at Manchester City, he looked like his hands were made out of poppadoms, and he had been blinded in both eyes, forcing Man City back into the market, and to sign Ederson the following season. Hart, meanwhile, presumably still in a state of shock at how quickly Guardiola had tossed him onto the scrap heap, endured a very mixed season, and as a goalkeeper, a mixed season is a bad season, on loan at Torino in Serie A. Next up was a stint at West Ham, which was even more mixed, a spell at Burnley, where he couldn't get in the team ahead of Nick Pope, and a single season as Hugo Lloris's number 2 at Tottenham. Hart ended his career with 3 seasons as a number 1 at Celtic, retiring at the end of last season. It is pretty wild that Hart made the England team at 21, started in a major tournament at 23, and had been capped 75 times by the time that Pep got hold of him, having just turned 29, and yet he won his last cap for England at 30, and he didn't even make the England squad for the 2018 World Cup, despite the fact that he had been England's number 1 at the last 3 tournaments, and was only 31 years old. As I said, I don't think Pep Guardiola does have a prolific track record of ruining players. I think that it is largely a fiction, but when it comes to Joe Hart, the man has blood on his hands. I don't think that I have seen a career unwind that quick since Democratic up-and-comer Anthony Weiner hit send to everyone in my contacts on a photo of his junk. He might have been up-and-coming in the photographs, but he certainly wasn't in the Democratic Party anymore. That is my 7, and to be honest, I am only really set on 5 of them, and 2 of those 5 will probably be controversial to a lot of other people, which I think illustrates quite well that Pep Guardiola, for all of the critiques, has a pretty good record when it comes to developing players. Which makes sense, I suppose, given that he is one of the most successful managers of all time and probably the most relentless and consistent of all time in terms of accumulating points. Other players whose names came up during my research include Barcelona flop Dmitro Chigrinsky, who I don't think Pep Guardiola ruined. I just don't think that he was good enough to play for possibly the greatest club side ever assembled at the time, and the pressure and standard coming from Shakhtar was overwhelming. Cole Palmer, who I think you can say Pep Guardiola probably underrated. I doubt that he would have sold him if he thought that he would become this good, but then no one really thought that he would become this good. Pep clearly liked him, just not quite enough to start him ahead of the likes of Foden and De Bruyne at the time, and, amusingly, Luca Toni, who accused Pep of ruining his career to his face, despite never coaching him, because false nines became all of the rage, while Toni was an old-school poacher, which he told Guardiola meant that no one wanted to sign him for 4 years. I almost included him because that is quite amusing, but an honourable mention felt more appropriate. Look, you've got to be sensible sometimes. This is my job. Anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potts Armour, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. That is 4 social media platforms. I can't be doing any more than that. All of which should be able to be found via the video description down below, along with everything else that's worth seeing in life, really. So yeah, check that out, why not? Cheers, and have a brilliant day.